So, this is the first in our series of timely topics. So these are going to be CPD sessions focused around pressing matters that are timely for when we're running them. With the start of the new school year, you'll have new Year 7 students, and you'll probably want to understand a bit more about what their Key Stage 2 results tell you or don't tell you about those students. And we have with us this afternoon the wonderful Claire Clay, who is Maths Regional Lead Practitioner in the East. And what she doesn't know about Key Stage 2 results doesn't bear knowing about, to be honest. I'm Emma Weston, Lead Practitioner in the North, but this afternoon is mostly going to be Claire leading you through. I might just ask a couple of probing questions if there's things that I can see in the chat or where we might need some further clarification. So over to you, Claire.
Thanks. And what Emma doesn't know is actually there are a couple of slides that got her name on, so she will go, oh, it's my turn.
Great.
So I'm going to turn my camera off because I've got dual screens and I don't want you to think that I'm being rude and turning my head away. But then we'll start going through stuff. And I know I think Caroline was in the meeting. I think she is still in the meeting. Who, if I forget anything, Caroline, please do chip in. Okay. So, right, okay, so obviously there on the screen you've got our details. Obviously Caroline's here as well with us. All of us can help you out, but we are going to talk about Key Stage 2 results. Before we do anything to do with Key Stage 2 results, we really need to talk about what happens in primary school. I don't know how much obviously all of you are up to date, but there have been some changes in what happens at primary school even this year. So the first thing to talk about is that from September the 1st this year, there is no longer a statutory requirement to do the Key Stage 1 maths test. They can still do one, but they will not be producing any more. So some schools may decide that they still want to sit one, but obviously they'll just have to photocopy one that has happened before. And the reception baseline will be replacing that. So the reception baseline was introduced in September 2021. Obviously it focuses on maths and language, but it's this bit about the fact that it has to be completed within the first 6 weeks of entering a reception class. And it's supposed to be done with an adult they are familiar with. How familiar you can get with an adult within the first 6 weeks of reception, not sure. It's a 20-minute one-to-one assessment. So the teacher has an iPad and the students respond to questions that they are asked. Obviously, they're not asked to write anything. The total number of marks available is 39, which makes me feel a bit awkward. I haven't personally seen one of those, and this was one of those moments when I was going to ask Caroline to chip in if she had. I haven't personally seen one happen in a classroom because they have to be done one-to-one, so they're not around us. Caroline, have you ever seen one?
No, I haven't.
No.
So I'm going to try. But again, because of the one-to-one nature of it and being in school at the right time and them trying to keep it as informal as possible, I think it's going to be a challenge. So what we could do is one time is get one of our wonderful reception teachers in to just do a little video for us, and we'll put it in one of the heads of maths meeting or something.
Yeah, if you are interested in that.
Yeah, I think even just an example of some of the types of questions might be helpful, because it's been quite tricky to find examples of what this is online.
Absolutely. I think it's quite well hidden. I think it's kept under lock and key a little bit. Obviously, it's in its very early days as well, but it would be quite interesting to see what the maths tasks are like. They were talking about it just being like patterns of blocks laid out on the floor. Can they put the next one down? Those sorts of things. So it would be quite interesting to see what that looks like, and we will try and find out for you.
I feel like there might be some hiding it just because don't want parents preparing anybody. Or
absolutely, that's what I think. It's under lock and key quite firmly, which is why we've not been able to get our hands on it. The times tables, the Year 4 times tables is something that I think will start affecting us fairly soon. Caroline and I did quite a lot on this last year. I'll leave that on the screen for you so that you can read it. You'll get the materials later to see whether you agree with this or do not agree with this. Okay, so it started on a voluntary basis in June 2019, but the last 2 years it has been happening. So they have 25 questions to answer, and the children must answer each question within a 6-second time limit. Now, there is a pause between each question. You can, if you have children with SEND requirements, you can have a pause between each question. So you can apply to have a pause between each question, but you cannot have extended time. So you can't ask for longer than 6 seconds. So if they have a reader or if they have somebody typing the numbers in for them, that cannot be extended. Also in the trials, they found that if you had a lag in your internet, because there is a way that, you know how some kids like to do things quickly, you can type in the answer and then press enter rather than waiting for the 6 seconds. And when you press enter, the next question is supposed to come up. But if there is a lag in your internet, sometimes the children will press an enter twice because nothing happened, and then it skipped over the next question. So there are some issues with it that they're trying to fix. They can do a repeat of it if there has been a problem during the test, but they're only allowed to do that twice. What they have said is that there will be no, like if they ask a question like 2 times 8, there will not be a repeat of 8 times 2. Okay, so there's no transposal of those numbers. This is the basics that they've said it will look like. So you can see that there's not many questions that, or not what percentage of questions would be on times, get my words out, the 2 times table. And there's more emphasis on the 6s, 7s, 8s, 9s and 12s. But again, if you think about year 4 having to do these questions, it is quite pressurised and they do get quite stressed about it. There is no expected standard. So they just get a mark out of 25. There is no expected standard. It doesn't matter what you read on Twitter or anything else. There is no threshold. You don't pass or fail. You just get a mark. And the schools, it's not reported anywhere in the sense that there's not a table of schools anywhere showing these results. But from next year, this should be data that you should be able to get about your students. So the current year 6 will have sat this, so you should be able to get that data, if you want to, from your feeder schools. So here's where Emma doesn't know what's coming up. Chat bomb time. So I'm going to need one of you to be looking at the chat as well. On the next 3 slides, you will see a question. You're going to put your answer in the chat box, but do not press enter until Emma tells you to. Are you ready for this, Emma?
I am ready.
Okay, so the question is, what percentage of students in 2022, the 2023 results aren't out yet, that's why it's 2022. What percentage of students in 2022 scored 25 out of 25, do you think, on the MTC?
So remember, just type in what percentage you think, but don't press enter yet.
We'll get Caroline and Emma to do the same. Depends if they've looked or not.
I looked already, so.
Well, I looked when it came out last year, but obviously I have no functioning memory, so I can't really remember.
All right, are we ready?
I can't actually see anyone having typed anything.
No one's
which I assume means that we're all right, okay. It wasn't showing me that people had typed anything in, maybe because it's so quick to type.
You hadn't said go.
No, I hadn't, because I didn't realise people had typed anything. I think it's too quick for it to come up as people typing.
Okay.
But we have responses of 30%, 23%, and a very pessimistic 3%.
Okay.
I think it's more like that.
Right,
Oh.
the answer was 27.
Oh!
27%.
And Lorna.
So gold star to David Foster because he was closest.
Okay, so 27% of students scored. I think that's
I know
quite
what the
high.
60 is now. I know what the
To me,
60 is now.
you know. Okay, next question. What percentage of those students scored 22 marks or more?
Oh.
Okay, so since I know that everyone is going to have their answer ready, I'll just choose a random point to say to post it.
Yeah.
So 3, 2, 1, press send.
What have we got this time?
So we've got 50, 41 and 57.
Not bad guesses, actually. I've lost my... It was 51%.
51. Right.
The 51% of pupils are getting more than are getting 22 or more marks. That's quite a big chunk, isn't it? When you think about it.
It is, especially since they're focusing in on the times tables that they know are typically quite problematic.
Absolutely. So there may be a time when we start to see this start rippling through. Now, it all depends, of course. If you don't use it, you lose it. So if they do this in year 4, but it's not continued, there could be some drop off. Let's hope not, because let's hope it's gone into their long-term memory. One more. What percentage of the students in 2022 scored less than half marks?
Oh. I'm going to guess this again. Oh,
Right.
sorry.
Well, since Caroline's ready, let's assume everyone's ready in post.
And definitely don't copy me because I'm useless.
And what we got?
So Caroline says 25, but we also have 28 and 2 people going for 14.
Oh, the winners are 15%.
Wow. Richard and Lorna both very close.
I think the thing is there that obviously if you do get these results from primary schools and people start coming to you with these results, then you're going to have that data. And are they students that you would target straight away coming into year 7 with some times table stuff? Obviously, what you don't know is whether any intervention has been done between year 4 and when they come to you. Something you could ask. Depends how much contact you have with your primary schools. But again, it's another piece of that puzzle that we might have about our student when we're looking at transition data. The mean score was 19.8. So again, quite high. And those results are published, and I've put a link on the PowerPoint so that if you want to have a look at those, you can. There's more on there, obviously. That's just the results as a cumulative percentage. That's what we've looked at before. So what happens at Key Stage 2? So that's what happens. So we have the Key Stage 1 test has gone. We've got the baseline happening. We've got in early Key Stage 2, we've got those, the MTC. So then what happens in year 6, basically? We have our SATs papers. Okay, so we have 1 arithmetic and 2 reasoning papers. They are all non-calculator. So again, me with my little calculator hat on, this is why students coming up to you in year 7 may have never used a calculator before, or not a scientific one anyway, but they may never have used a calculator. The results from this year showed that there was a more gradual increase in the difficulty in the 2023 papers than in previous years. So that means that we've had quite a few years where we might have a year 6 question and then a year 3 question, whereas I think they kind of spread the difficulty slightly a bit better. The context of the questions were generally relatable, so there weren't any that were in a sense that year 6 wouldn't understand, and that spatial awareness was needed to answer several of the questions. Okay, so every year the SATs papers are created, and it's the same as the GCSEs. They try to create them in a very similar way, but obviously tests vary, which is why they then standardise the score. So you get a raw score out of 110. that is changed to a standardised score out of 120. Any pupil who scores 80 to 99 is said to be not meeting the expected standard. The 100 is obviously the expected mark, but anyone from 100 to 109 is working at expected standard. The 110 plus is working at greater depth. And if they don't manage to reach the 100 on the scaled score, they are given an N. And we do have some students, but not that many, that will get the N. So back to Emma. We've got one more, just for the timing, Emma. We've got one more chat bomb coming up, and then we'll have a bit more, and then there'll be a couple more. So again, your chance in the chat. The expected score is 100. How many marks did they need to get this year to get 110? Sorry,
Okay,
out of the 100. Sorry, out of the 110. How many marks out of 110 did they get to have to get that scaled score of 100?
Okay, so remember, have your answer ready, but don't press send yet. Caroline Kennedy, I'm looking at you. And 3, 2, 1, let's see what you've got.
We got anything? Does Caroline write something?
We have quite a lot of, well, we had quite a lot of consensus originally. So we've got 3 answers of 70.
Right.
And then a 14.
Oh, okay. So it doesn't change much over the years, you'll see, but actually last year was the lowest at 56. So there's a range quite often. And this year it was 50. Anyone who scored 56 to 59 marks got that expected score. So I'm going to let your little brains tick about that for a minute. Well, my little brain, yours is probably bigger than mine, about what percentage that is. So here is the breakdown of everything. So they get a score of reading, writing and maths. So 59% of pupils reach the expected standard. And then they're saying that 73% of pupils met the expected standard in maths, up from 71%. So next chat bomb comes up. So we now know that to get the expected score of 100, you had to get 56 marks. The lowest score you can get is 80. How many marks out of 110 do you have to get the 80?
Are we chat bombing this one as well, Claire?
We are chat bombing it. There was a slide, you missed it.
I think my my internet might be lagging a bit.
Okay.
Okay, so have your answers ready to go. And 3, 2, 1, press send.
Wow. To get the scale score of 80, remember they had 56 to get the 100. To get the scale score of 80, you need 3 marks.
So nobody in the chat went as low as 3, if I'm honest, until we were looking at this session. I don't think I'd have gone as low as 3 either. No,
it's quite interesting that last year it was just the 3, whereas we went back to the range of 3 to 5 this year. 3 marks though. So if you've got a student sat in your class who's got a standardised score of 80, they may have only scored 3 marks out of 110. And I'm going to show you some questions in a little while as well, so you can see what they look like. So the papers are made up of content from different year groups. Last question in the chat bomb then, what percentage of the paper do you think was year 6 content? So it has year 3, year 4, year 5 and year 6 content. How much of the paper was year 6?
Okay, so again, I can't see whether people have started typing or not, so I'm just going to give a little pause and press send.
Okay, I can see three
Okay.
answers. I managed to see those ones. I've got an 18, a 33 and a 20.
Yeah.
It was 36. So now think a little bit more about that. If you've only got to get 56 marks out of 110, that's about 51% of the paper. But 36% of it is key stage from year 6. So they don't have to get any year 6 content correct to get the standard mark of 100. They don't actually have to get that much of the year 5 content correct, because they've only got to get half the paper right. So I find that when I first found that out, I found that quite shocking. That I could have a child in my class and I was being told that they were of expected standard, but they may not have got any of the year 6 content correct. Here's the breakdown over the years of how much is year 3, how much is year 4, how much is year 5, and how much is year 6. But again, if you look at the year 5 and the year 6 together, you've got 68% there. Okay, so you don't have to get all of the year 5 stuff right, do you? And you can see that actually this year was the lowest percentage to get the expected level at 51%. What they do then do, and you can get hold of this, is they have a look at how many marks there were for each of the, or how many questions there were. So they're looking at the percentage of questions that contain number and place value, the percentage that contain calculations, and so on. So you will see that there are 2 topics there, calculations and fractions, decimals, and percentages. And if you got all of those right, you'd get your standard mark. So you wouldn't have to teach any of those other topics. Now, hopefully your primary schools are not playing that game. But with the pressure of getting getting those standard scores, or the expected score of the 100, as us with GCSE, you do start to fall into those traps a little bit of making sure that they can do certain things to be able to pass. But over the years, look at how the percentage has changed with fractions, decimals, and percentages. So last year had the largest percentage of fractions, decimals, percentages on it. The next thing we want to look at is those scaled scores. Now you can get hold of these if you just Google Key Stage 2 standardised scores. They're on the government website, free for everyone to get. These were from last year. If you've got a class that have got a range, this is only a range of scaled scores of 5. So you might have a class that's bigger than that. Your range is bigger than that. Here we've got 95 to 100, but look at how much difference there is between the raw scores. So you could have a student who scored 36 and you could have a student who scored 59. So that's actually quite a big range out of 110 when you're thinking about it. So the child that scored 36 marks has only really got about 60% knowledge of, or questions right, of the child who got 59. But quite often we look at those scaled scores and think, it's only 5, it's not that far. And then also think about the arithmetic paper. So the primary schools do really heavily look at the arithmetic paper, the paper 1, which we'll look at in a minute. If they got 20 marks from the arithmetic paper, then they've only got to get 16 from the reasoning papers. And there's 2 reasoning papers, so they may have only got 8 marks off each one. So again, all of this knowledge helps you to build a picture of the students that are coming to you or sitting in your classroom now.
Sorry, David's made a really good point in the chat as well about parents not being aware of this as well, and having issues where they've students have been expected standard at primary, and then when they move to year 7, they seem to not be doing very well. And I think looking into what these scores are actually telling us and the percentage that they need to be able to do from the paper, we can kind of understand why.
Yeah, absolutely. So the next one's the breakdown of the arithmetic paper. So again, you can look there and you can see, look at how many of the marks come from multiplication and division. And what you'll see there is that there's 4 marks for long division and 4 marks for long multiplication. And we'll talk again in a second about these being the 2-mark questions. And this is where all these Chinese whispers started to begin about formal methods and students having to use formal methods to answer questions. But you can start to see also why primary schools heavily go in for their calculation skills. So let's have a talk about the arithmetic paper. So the arithmetic paper is 30 minutes long. It's got 36 questions and it's worth 40 marks. So you can already see that most of the questions there are worth 1 mark. There are 4 questions that are not. The 2-mark questions are all long multiplication and long division. None of the others are. So that's the only place where those 2-mark questions are. And you get both marks if the answer is correct, no matter what method is used. And that is where there is this misconception amongst many secondary school teachers, amongst many primary school teachers. They do not have to use the formal method to do any question on the SATs paper. But if they get the answer wrong, just on those questions, it is only formal methods where they get the 1 mark for the working. And don't fall into this trap of they have to do formal methods because otherwise they don't get things marked correctly. Okay, so if the answer is wrong, only certain methods get those marks. And this is what that's evidenced in the mark scheme. This is what the mark scheme looks like for those questions. Fairly standard, I suppose. And if the answer is incorrect, award 1 mark for a formal method. What's happened therefore to Key Stage 2 teaching? Well, this is one of the things that Caroline and I have really been working on and trying to stop, because what happened straight after the new papers came out, around the same time as the GCSE changed, was that a lot of primary schools started teaching things very formal. Okay, so they stopped doing the concrete, the pictorial, the abstract, and they really pushed students to use those formal methods. We have seen schools where they teach arithmetic separate to reasoning, and they have arithmetic lessons and they have reasoning lessons. Most schools, though, just concentrate very heavily on the arithmetic. This means that pupils they see the methods, not the understanding. So, for instance, this question, I've put on here, how would you do this question? I would imagine everybody sat there has worked out the answer to that in about 2 seconds. But I bet you didn't write a column method. I bet you did something more along the lines of the fact that you add 100 and take 1, because it's the most efficient method. Some students might be adding 10s on and then the 9. Some might partition. However, what you're most likely to see a child do is this, and this also, not this. And when you speak to primary school children, a lot of them will tell you that you have to put the large number as the first number. So even though that calculation is 27 add 99, they will write 99 add 27 in their column. Now, whether that's because it eradicates a lot more problems with subtraction at primary level, I don't really know what the answer is for the reasoning behind it, but I know that even when I've had trainees, I've asked them the question of which way round should it be, and some trainees have said, oh, the 99 should be the first number, because that's what they were told at school. Okay, but obviously there, the most efficient method is add 100 and take 1, which is a number line representation. to mental method. So what happened in the Key Stage 2 SATs is that students are spending time doing column methods on questions that they expect them to do mentally. I've noticed this recently as well. And I don't know if any of you have seen this in a classroom, but I've seen this in a few classrooms now where I've asked Year 7s to add more than 2 numbers together. And they add the first 2 numbers together, get an answer, then add the third number onto that answer, get an answer, and add the third number or the fourth number onto that. Now, I don't know, again, whether that's because maybe at their primary school, they'd only ever added 2 things together rather than adding 4 things together. But again, it's something to look out for in your classrooms. And this one, I'm sure at the beginning of term, a lot of you have been doing adding and subtracting. We tend to do a lot of number work to start with. A lot of students will automatically do this. And you might have top set Year 7, and they might all be able to do that really successfully. But do they really understand, and this is where you need to delve into things in your classroom, do they really understand that subtraction is about difference? And this calculation is exactly the same. All I've done is subtracted 1 off both numbers. The difference is still the same. So if you are looking at greater depth when you're thinking about subtraction, you could have a think about that, because again, I don't see that explored very much at Key Stage 2 because they're just going down the route of that formal method. This is what we've got. This is what we're going to do with it. This is the DFE guidance for Year 6. And again, I've put a link on there so that you can get to it. I think the example there where we're calculating 8 to take away 4.85. And they're talking about the decimal complement to 5, that kind of gets represented more on a number line if you think about it, and is a really good way of answering that question. But most students will actually try and put that in a column, put the decimal point on, put the zeros on. There's nothing wrong with that if they are competent and confident with that, but we know that we have so many students that are not competent and confident when we are subtracting in a column. Just to prove to you a little bit more that it is any method, this is where the mark scheme tells you exactly how you can answer questions. So there it's saying diagrams, symbols or words are acceptable. And you can do trial and improvement. Excuse me. So this has come from the Education Endowment Foundation. And the bit that I've highlighted there is about number lines. Should be used as a central representation tool. Key Stage 2 and Key Stage 3. But again, a lot of that has gone because they're worrying about these formal methods. So if you do have contact with your primary schools and they have a different message that they have in their school about formal methods, feel free to show them any of this stuff to say, actually, you don't have to use those formal methods. What's happened to the results? Well, because of that, many students do not get through all 36 questions. They're spending time doing 40 multiplied by 7 in a column rather than using an efficient mental method. Therefore, they don't get to the 2-mark questions and their results are therefore not as strong. They also don't have those reasoning skills for later. These were the first 4 questions on this year's arithmetic paper. So again, you could see that question 1, they might be writing a column method for. Question 3 might be the same. Instead of partitioning it and maybe doing 700 multiplied 4 and 2 multiplied by 4 and adding them together. And I think it's really interesting how they've written question 2 and question 4. Because again, unless they have looked at that in school, they may not like the fact that the box is on the left-hand side of the equals sign. Breaking it down even further, having a look at those calculations. So this is just the arithmetic paper. There's your marks from multiplication and division, but remember that 4 of each of those have come from those 2-mark questions. But look at the fact that if you do your calculations and your decimals, you're already on 28 marks, which is half of the 56 that you actually need. So you can start to see why certain schools may not spend that much time on fractions, because the fractions don't tend to come up that much in the reasoning papers either. So if there's only 9 marks on fractions, how often do we think that students are going to know a lot more about fractions when they come to us and they really don't? And the fact that all of the questions that they deemed to be ratio questions were finding percentages. I need to just have a quick look at those. These are the fraction questions that came off the arithmetic paper this year. Now, I don't know about my colleagues in the meeting, but there's a few thoughts that go through my head about how many of my year 11s could do those questions. Especially when you start to look at the fact that 2/3 multiplied by 900 rather than 2/3 of 900. The adding fractions with the same denominator, they've also put a whole number in. So again, you can start to see why schools may not think that it is a good use of their time to spend ages and ages and ages doing fractions if they deem it to be that they're not going to be able to answer some of these questions. And you might actually be quite shocked by some of those questions, like 2 and 5/6 subtract 3/4. And when you think about where that sits in GCSE, and we are giving these questions to year 6 pupils. Statutory requirements, I think it's really key to point out that it says divide proper fractions by whole numbers. It does not say divide a proper fraction by a proper fraction. So if students are coming to you talking about KFC and any trick like that, because they've done fraction divided by fraction, it is not on the year 6 curriculum, and it may be something that you want to talk to your primary schools about, or go and talk to them about how they are teaching that if they are teaching it. It may be something that they do after the SATs, where they say, oh, we're going to do something that you'll be doing at high school. But I know for a fact that quite a lot of them do misread that and think that they've got to do a fraction divided by a fraction. Again, here are the questions that came off the percentages. So they're just the percentage questions, so that you had an idea what they looked like. And this is the year 6 ratio and proportion syllabus or curriculum. Okay. And what effect does that have on reasoning? So the 2 reasoning papers have 35 marks each. So there was 40 marks on the arithmetic paper, 35 marks on each of the reasoning. So it's a shame that, in a way, schools spend quite a long time sometimes on arithmetic, because actually you've got a lot more marks on the reasoning papers. Many pupils cannot pick out of a question whether they are going to add, subtract, multiply and divide, because they need to see the symbol to have the clue as to what to do. Sometimes if you then give them the clue, they can actually do the calculation and they can see how to get the answer. And that's possibly because a lot less curriculum time is spent answering those sorts of questions. Once again, definitely on this paper, pupils can use any method to answer these questions, and they're not going to lose any marks for the method that they use. I thought this was quite interesting. So this is the year 6 curriculum for geometry. Now, if you're a foundation pupil at GCSE, how much do we add to that? Maybe a bit about parallel lines, angles on parallel lines, but actually they've done quite a lot of the geometry if they've been taught it. And again, when we're looking there, they should be able to translate simple shapes and reflect them in an axis. The statistics, interpret and construct pie charts. Now, the reason it only says mean there as an average is because they've done mode and median in earlier years, because obviously this is year 6. So sometimes it's worth having a look at that, but be aware of the fact that because a lot of schools spend quite a lot of time on their calculation skills, and actually they do spend quite a lot of time on their fractions, decimals and percentages, some of the things like statistics and the shape don't necessarily get taught to the extent that we would like it to be taught. It is taught, but it isn't necessarily their focus as much. And you can see why when there aren't as many marks on it on the paper. Some reasoning questions I'd like you to look at. I think for 1 mark, you've got to do quite a lot of reasoning there. And again, I keep thinking back to my year 11s that I used to teach and how many of them would actually be able to do that question. This one also was on the 2022 paper. And I put there, what do you think the question was? The question, lots of students answered that question as if it was volume, because you would, looking at that, you've been given the length, the width and the height. But the question asked you what was the total length of the straws. And take a look at this one. This question is about mean, but there's lots and lots and lots of reading you've got to do, and lots of misconceptions in there. And even the question, what is the mean number of people who finished the marathon per decade? And then you've got to round your answer to the nearest 100. That was, I think, the only question on the paper that was worth 3 marks. So last time I'm going to ask you, I think, to chat bomb today. So fingers at the ready. I'm going to show you a question from last year's paper, and I want you to tell me how many marks you think this question is worth. Now, I don't think Emma's seen this, I don't think Caroline's seen this, so you can join in too. Okay, are we ready with our marks? Put them in the chat bomb now, so press enter now. Okay. 2 answers of 3. Caroline thinks 1. Caroline, you're such a meanie.
In fairness, the others all seemed so stingy.
Yeah,
I
it's
can't
true.
believe it.
It was 2 marks.
It's 2.
2 marks. But again, if we saw a question like that in a GCSE, it would probably be at least 3, possibly more.
I think you and I were discussing the one about the remainder a little while ago, and we thought that if that had been on a GCSE paper, that would have been worth 2.
Yeah, definitely this one
as well.
Yeah, because you'd probably get a mark, wouldn't you, for working out that you needed to do something with 36.
Yeah.
So this one, 2 marks. You have to do quite a lot to get 1, to be honest. If the answer is incorrect, award 1 mark for evidence of a complete method which contains no more than 1 error, basically. So how does that affect our teaching at Key Stage 3, Key Stage 4? Well, I think you've seen that there will be gaps in the knowledge. There will be students coming to us that do not know all the things that maybe we think they're going to know because they've got the expected standard. And I think if we know that, we can do something about it. So if I was going back to my team, I would be talking to them about actually looking at their year 7s, looking at that data and saying, you know, where are they? So if I've got exam standards of 100 in my class, or the expected score of 100 in my class, I know that they've got around about that 51% of those details. Also, we've got this issue that they may never have seen a calculator before. They may never have used a calculator before, especially not a scientific one. And now I'm sure that some of you are seeing the new ones creeping into your classrooms, because I've seen lots of them this week. And it is completely different, even just the keypad down the bottom, to the old ClassWiz calculator that we've had for a few years, which was almost identical to the one that we had before and looks like a lot of the other calculators out there. But we also need to be aware of the fact that the numbers on a phone pad, should they be dialing any numbers on their phone pad, are actually the other way around to a calculator. So if you have those students who are a standard score, quite low, and you ever see them even just looking for the numbers on the keypad, it could be because they're the other way around to using a phone, they're used to using a phone, or it just could be that they haven't had enough access to an actual calculator to be able to find, because there's quite a lot of cognitive overload on those screens and on those calculators now. So they might just not be able to find the buttons and where they are. Bear in mind that when we do use calculators as an integral part of our teaching, it appears to have that positive effect on students' calculations, whether that's because they're able to do more calculations in the lesson, so therefore they actually learn the skills that we're trying to teach them. Not sure, but if you've heard me rant at all about calculators, which I'm sure lots of you have, start thinking about where you can get year sevens using them, even if it's just using them to find the answers to calculations and mark their own work. So what are the important conclusions from this? Things that you need to take away. Know your students. Get those marks and have a look at them. See if you can get the raw score. See if you can get more data from your data team about those year sevens. Be aware of those differences between scaled scores and make sure that everyone in your team knows that. We sometimes forget that even the most experienced teachers don't necessarily know about these scaled scores and what they actually mean. Take time to have a look at what is on that Key Stage 2 curriculum. Have a look and see. You might be shocked. And remember that they've never used a calculator in class. Or they may never have used a calculator in class. Some might have done. Which brings me to my little ad that I've put in at the end. I'm going to be running some CPD on using those new calculators on Monday, the 9th of October. I'm sure lots of you have got the link to the calculator cards that I've been making. If you haven't, the link is there. And if you can, and you are starting to see these and you want to have some training on them, we're going to do some training on the 9th of October. And I think, Emma, that is me.
Fabulous. Thank you so much, Claire. And just on those calculator cards, just so you know that Claire has been making those for both the older style calculator, she already has a bank of those, and has been working her way through the new style calculator as well, and has a really good bank of those built up. So really useful, given that you are going to see both types in your lessons. Just a couple of things that occurred to me while Claire was talking. I think maybe because I've seen in year 7 do now activities just today, questions where they rely on some of these arithmetic strategies, and questions that a teacher thinks are going to be quite quick and easy for students to do because of the methods they're choosing. They're actually more complicated than they realise. So maybe that's something for us to be aware of and preempt. And also it's interesting kind of the parallels between a GCSE paper and some of the responses we get from pupils afterwards of, oh, I could have done that if I'd have known it was asking this, and that's kind of mirrored across some of those Key Stage 2 reasoning questions. And maybe we need to think carefully about the emphasis that we're putting on different things at all key stages. But yeah, a couple of things that occurred to me, but thank you so much, Claire. That was really helpful. I'm not sure, I can't see any other questions in the chat, but I don't know if anyone wants to unmute themselves to ask anything about this or type anything into the chat.
I was wondering about the data that's available to schools on how individual pupils performed on their papers, because I was sure at one point you were able to access some more detail on, because it seems to me that the SATs are great in terms of ranking kids, but really it doesn't really help us know what each individual kid can do. So I was just wondering what data was available from schools for, from primaries towards secondaries.
Last year, definitely, you could still get a QLA downloaded for every child that comes to you from the SATS data. I have to be honest and say that I haven't checked out whether that is available this year, but I imagine, I mean, every year since the new SATs took place, you have been able to download that about your pupils. I know it's not something that a lot of high schools do, but you can do it, and you can
and I'm
see
just wondering
areas.
how useful that is. I'm just, if I don't want things to be time consuming, but it might be useful to sort of see what they're able to do just briefly. Get a class.
I think themes as well. If you can see that it's quite clear in certain areas in the country that fractions is not taught very well, or they're not answered very well. They might be taught extremely well, but not answered very well across a large number of students. And I think as secondary school teachers, we see that a lot, don't we? That we see weaknesses in students' understanding of fractions, and you can possibly see that in those QLAs.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I suppose even if you're not able to spend the time looking in great depth, maybe there are particular students that you might want to look in more detail at, so that you have a bit of a starting point for some of those interventions that you might need to put in place. I can't see any questions in the chat, and I can't see anyone kind of waving a hand or anything like that. I can see
we've just had
Sam
one that's come
Dale's,
in.
Yeah, I think I mean, I just remember it being quite delayed and thinking before, what use is it now? We've found out these things about the kids now, so I don't know, if it comes through in a timely way, how useful it would be.
Which
and also
perhaps
I think
might be why
the other things that we hear quite a lot, if we don't use it, because by the time it's got there.
I was going to say on that, obviously the SATs results were delayed this year because of the King's coronation, so they had to move the SATs papers along, and it seemed so we didn't actually get the SATs results until July this year instead of June, so it may be that the QLA data will be later as well.
That's a really good point, actually. That could be feeding into it.
I love the way they delayed it by one day, and then the whole results were delayed by weeks.
I've just seen David's message about the link for the calculator card, so I'm just going to put that into the chat. So hopefully that should help. But if there's no further questions or comments from anyone, I'd just like to thank you all for joining us this afternoon and for taking part in the chat bomb questions. We will send the PowerPoint out, and we've also been recording it. So if this is something that you think would be helpful for other members of your team to see, or there's bits you want to revisit, you'll be able to do that as well. I'd just like to thank Claire again for explaining that so clearly. And yeah, thank you very much, everyone, for joining in. And I will stop the recording now.